Good morning to you. Thank you so much for finding time to be with us today. It is Monday, the 28th of November 2022. Surely but slowly the year is coming to an end, and just a couple of 2 days I think from now we shall mark the end of November. I trust that you had a wonderful weekend, and being a Monday I do have so much in store for you that I would like to bring us up to date with. And so before I even get farther, let me bring us up to date with the latest headlines from some newspapers in Kenya and also some regional newspapers. My name is Miriam Mugutu, and a warm welcome to you. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and joining us. We start with the Daily Nation. Fresh face-off revealed Azimio la Umoja One Kenya's three-pronged approach to defend itself and deal with renegades as it counters President William Ruto's sham offensive in coalition strongholds. In an exclusive interview, Deputy Secretary General and National Assembly Minority Leader Opiyo Wandayi explains Azimio's plans inside and outside the House to maintain unity. You'll find that on page 6 and 7. Maize imports, farmers' protest fall on deaf ears. The government has set tough conditions for farmers to either release hoarded grains or compete with 10 million bags of imported maize to be released to the market to ease artificial shortages and low. But Mr. Koskei ruled out deferral importation of 10 million bags of maize and cautioned leaders against politicizing the process for selfish gains. That story is on page 10. 3.4 million, that is the number of candidates who will sit the 3 national examinations this year, and then already as grade 6 class 8 exams start. And you'll find that on the back page. Wiper leader Kalonzo Musyoka throws heart in the ring for presidency in 2027. You'll find that on page 5. Why defaulting on the hustler loans will be the costly affair for borrowers. That story is on page 8 on the Daily Nation. We turn our attention now to the Standard newspaper this morning. And the main headline on the Standard newspaper: exams like no other. There are almost 3.5 million candidates, making it the biggest lot of recent times, and it will be the first time national tests are administered to grade 6 learners. The pioneer class of CBC. That story is on page 6 and 7. IBC for Raila calls for return of People's Assembly. That story is on page 4. Why home is most unsafe for women. That is on a special report. Remember, I think we've started marking the 16 days of advocacy on gender-based violence. And so that is a special coverage, I think, on the same on page 10 on the Standard. Chinese protest lockdowns. And we've been see bosses. The story is on page 4 and 5 on the Star newspaper. And then CES forms team to profish deaths in Lake Victoria. You'll find that on page 7. And private insurers, why we don't cover mental health. That story is on page 2. Let me see. Trying to see if hold on. Very well, so we're just going to leave that there. Just up there, graffiti artist sues Karua for 2.1 million over campaigns ads. That story is on page 9 on the Star newspaper. So let's look at some regional newspapers from across the continent. And we start with, just a moment. Okay, so we start with that from the Herald from Zimbabwe. Exciting times for Zim-EU relations. All right, I guess that's some good news. And Wedza celebrates new government complex. The Chronicle, time up for colonial education. All right, okay, so the Daily News from Egypt, Prime Minister, CBE Governor follow up on necessary FX reserves for importing basic commodities, 3 billion Ugandan shillings. The Daily Monitor from Uganda, 4.5 trillion Ugandan shillings wealth plan leaves North poorer. The Citizen from Tanzania, how drought, my looks like I lost it there. Just a moment. All right, the citizen from Tanzania, how drought has ravaged farmers, livestock keepers. Prolonged drought has in recent months wreaked havoc on agriculture and animal husbandry in some parts of the country, bringing these important economic activities to a virtual standstill. So that has been a problem across board, not just in Tanzania or Kenya, but we've seen, countries being affected by the extreme weather patterns, and that has led to shortage of even food, even for countries that had food security. That is not the case anymore. So tough times indeed. And there you go. In Tanzania also, they are reeling from that. All right. I think I got that. So let me bring us up to date with a detailed news headline this morning. And we start with Malawi. Malawi's Vice President Saulos Chilima has been arrested on allegations that he accepted money in exchange of awarding government contracts, the country's anti-corruption agency says. He is accused of receiving $280,000 from a British businessman and other items, a statement says. Dr. Chilima pleaded not guilty to the corruption charges in court on Friday. He had already been stripped of his powers in June when he was first accused by the anti-corruption Gbagbo. He was accused of being behind some of the post-election violence just happened in the country over a decade ago. About 3,000 people were killed in a brief civil war that followed the disputed 210 presidential poll. Mr. Blegod, 50, arrived in Ivory Coast main city Abidjan on a commercial flight from neighboring Ghana on Saturday afternoon. There was heavy security at the airport, and his supporters were advised not to go there to show respect for all the victims of the 210 conflict. But thousands of them gathered in the suburb of Yopougon, a former stronghold of Blegod's, where he was expected to make a statement according to his entourage. In 2010, Mr. Blegod was head of the pro-Gbagbo Youth Patriots movement. Mr. Gbagbo had declared himself the victor of that year's election, which the Electoral Commission said had been won by his main rival, the current President Alassane Ouattara. Fighting broke out and eventually ended when Mr. Gbagbo was captured in April 2010. He was later arrested and taken to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Officials in Somalia say they are questioning 20 foreign nationals who had spent years with the Al-Shabaab militant group. The men from Pakistan and Iran say they had been working as fishermen before being captured by Somali pirates. The Pakistani and Bangladeshi men have told local officials that they were fishermen who were being captured after being captured trade. And then we go on to Cameroon, and the authorities in Cameroon say a landslide in the capital Yaoundé has killed at least 14 people. The regional governor, Nasseri Paul Bear, said those who died had been attending a funeral. Rescue teams were still searching for bodies and survivors on Sunday evening. Residents said several families of mourners had gathered under large tents on waste ground at the top of a hill when part of the ground beneath them gave way. It is the latest weather-related disaster in Cameroon this year. Correspondents say heavy rains have triggered several devastating floods throughout Cameroon and weakening infrastructure and displacing thousands of residents. And then the latest from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Presidential elections in the DRC will be held on the 20th December next year. The Electoral Commission has announced currently insecurity is plaguing the east of the country, with numerous rebel groups creating instability. Last week's attempts to get the M23 group to agree to a ceasefire appear to have foundered. The AFP news agency reports that the head of the Electoral Commission acknowledged that persistent insecurity in some parts of the territory would make holding a free, democratic and transparent vote a challenging, but the authorities are determined to stick to the timetable. We head back to Somalia, where a hotel in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, where government officials are known to stay, has come under attack soon after the attack at Villa Rose began. Environment Minister Aldo Hirsi said he had survived the attack. There were also unconfirmed reports that Mohammed Ahmed, Somalia's internal security minister, was injured. Al-Shabaab militants said they had stormed the hotel. The Islamist group has been active in Somalia for the last 15 years. The Villa Rose Hotel, where the ambush took place, is a short walk from the presidential palace in central Mogadishu. An unknown number of assailants armed with explosives and guns were involved, police officers told Reuters news agency, and one witness described hearing a huge blast followed by a heavy exchange of gunfire. Very well, so the authorities in Equatorial Guinea have announced on Saturday the re-election of Teodoro Obiang Nguema Basogo for a 6th term. The 80-year-old has been in power since 1979. Announcing the results, the head of the Electoral Commission said Obiang had won with 94.9% of the votes. Obiang had the backing of a coalition of 15 parties, including his own party, the Democratic Party of Equatorial Guinea, PDGA. The percentages won by the opposition candidates were not announced. Now, weeks before the scrutiny, security forces arrested opposition figures, with the regime saying it was thwarting a conspiracy to commit attacks in the capital, Malabo, and economic have-barter. The authorities also closed the country's land borders with neighboring Gabon and Cameroon before campaigning began. Obiang is the longest ruling head of state in the world, excluding the monarchs. Calm has returned in Sao Tome and Principe after Thursday's attempted coup. At least 4 people lost their lives and many were arrested. Speaking on Friday, Prime Minister Patrice Trovoada sought to reassure the population. Amongst those arrested was Delphine Neves, the former president of the outgoing National Assembly, as well as deputy and former mercenary Alencio Costa, who had already attempted a coup in 2009 and who also lost his life. The center-right party of Prime Minister Trovoada, ADI, won an absolute majority in September's general elections. Supporters of South Africa's ruling party ANC and South Africa's Communist Party staged a protest outside the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg on Saturday. The demonstrators protested against the announced release of the killer of anti-apartheid activist Chris Hani, who was shot in 1993. Last Monday, the Constitutional Court announced the release of Janusz Wallus, a 69-year-old Polish immigrant with links to the Afrikaner far-right. Janusz Wallus was sentenced to death by the abolition of the death penalty in 1994, commuted his sentence to life imprisonment. The front lines between the government troops and M23 rebels remained calm in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo on Sunday. For a second day running, local residents told the AFP after a ceasefire came into force. DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi attended a regional mini-summit in Luanda on Wednesday, agreeing a deal on the cessation of hostilities in DRC's war-torn east from Friday evening. M23 rebels, who have seized swaths of territory in recent weeks, were to withdraw from occupied zones, failing which the East African Regional Force would intervene. Local people reported no sign of a rebel pullout by midday Sunday. Clashes had continued right up to the ceasefire deadline north of the provincial capital, Goma, but on Sunday both sides were holding their positions, local told the AFP News. On Saturday, Mai Mai militia and the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR, fought with the M23 for control of a zone northeast of the provincial capital Goma, where the National Army is not present. As a result, M23 took over the town of Kisharo, 30 kilometers from the Ugandan border, residents have confirmed. AFP was unable to independently confirm the accounts of the locals. The March 23 group had been dormant for years, but took up arms again late last year, accusing the government of failing to honor a disarmament deal. M23 has overrun large tracts of mountainous Rutshuru territory north of Goma, a city of 1 million, which they briefly captured 10 years ago. The DRC accuses Rwanda of supporting the rebels, charges Kigali denies. In turn, alleges Kinshasa works with the FDLR, a Hutu faction present in the sprawling country since the 1994 genocide of Tutsis in neighboring Rwanda. The M23 is among scores of armed groups that have turned East Democratic Republic of Congo into one of Africa's most violent regions. Most of the groups are legacies of 2 wars before the turn of the century that sucked in countries from the region and has since left millions dead. Jihadists allied with Islamic State group are advancing in northeastern Mali, prompting terrified citizens to flee their homes, sources now say. The Islamic State in the Greater Sahara ISGS launched an offensive in the Gao and Menaka regions in March, triggering heavy fighting with local armed groups and rival jihadists. Witnesses and other sources contacted news agencies confirmed and the sustained GS push in this remote and dangerous area, and rights campaigners say civilians have been massacred. The strategic town of Gao and Menaka have long been in the forefront of Mali's decade-long jihadist crisis. Since 2012, thousands have died and hundreds of thousands have fled their homes in an insurgency that has spread to neighboring Niger and Burkina Faso. Despair at the toll prompted Malian army officers to mount a coup. In 2020, the junta has brought in Russian paramilitaries, a move that prompted France to pull out groups who had been battling jihadists for 9 years in that country. President Salva Kiir has relieved and replaced several ministers, county commissioners, independent commissioners, and an advisor of Upper Nile State. In a presidential decree read on the national broadcaster SSBC, President Kiir removed the state advisor for economic affairs, Nyanuer William Nguyen. He also relieved the Minister of Local Government and Law Enforcement, Thorn Moon Kerjok, and appointed Nyanuer William in his place. And the Minister of Peace Building, Tut Simon, the Minister of Trade Industry, Simon Dupe Pork, and the Minister of Labour and other ministries. The head of state also sacked several independent commissioners in the oil-rich state. And the Independent Commission's office in Isa local government area of Ebonyi State in Nigeria was on Sunday set ablaze by unknown persons. This was disclosed in a statement signed by the National Commissioner and Chairman, Information and Voter Education Committee, Festus Okoye. This is the third attack of INEC local government offices with a space of 3 weeks following attacks in Ogun and Osun states. The incident, which occurred around 10 a.m., left the main building and all the movable and immovable items inside it burned. According to the statement, the burnt items included 340 ballot boxes, 130 voting cubicles, 14 electoral power generators, large water storage tanks, assorted office furniture, and fixtures yet to be determined quantities of permanent voter cards. However, the Commission said the police have commenced full investigations into the incident. And still staying with Nigeria, the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project and 16 other Nigerians have filed a lawsuit against the regime of President Muhammadu Buhari over its failure to investigate the activities of illicit oil pipelines between 2001 and 2022. This follows the discovery of at least 58 illicit oil pipelines used to plunder the country's oil revenue. According to a statement obtained by local media outlets, the stealing is reportedly carried out through the illicit pipeline connected to the trunk line via an abandoned pipeline and linked to a location in the high seas where they load crude oil into vessels and sell overseas. The suit was filed last Friday before the ECOWAS Court of Justice in Abuja by Serap Chief Eric Doe, who is suing for himself as the lead of the Goi community in Gokana local government area of Rivers State and on behalf of the Goi community and 15 other concerned Nigerians. Now, the plaintiffs are arguing that Buhari's regime is failing to uphold its international legal obligations to ensure that the country's oil wealth is used solely to benefit Nigerians and the wealth does not end up in private pockets. They argued that the illegal pipelines that had operated for many years without notice, implying a flagrant violation of the international human rights obligations to ensure that proper, effective and efficient management of the country's wealth and natural resources. The plaintiffs asked the ECOWAS court for some reliefs, which includes a declaration that everyone in the Niger Delta is entitled to the internationally recognized human right or to adequate standard of living. And then we end with We end from Ethiopia. Allies of Ethiopia's federal military are looting property and carrying out mass detentions in Tigray. That is according to eyewitnesses and aid workers. The accounts raise fresh concerns about alleged atrocities more than 3 weeks after the warring sides signed a truce that diplomats and others hoped would bring an end to suffering in the embattled region that's home to more than 5 million people. Tigray is still largely cut off from the rest of Ethiopia, although aid deliveries into the region resumed after the November 2nd ceasefire deal signed in South Africa. There is limited or no access into the region for human rights researchers, making it difficult for journalists and others to obtain information from Tigray as Ethiopia forces continue to assert control of the region. Eritrean troops and forces from the neighboring Ethiopian region of Amhara, who have been fighting on the side of Ethiopia's federal military in the Tigray conflict, have looted businesses, private properties, vehicles and health clinics in Shire, a northwestern town that was captured from Tigray forces last month. Two aid workers were told the Associated Press, speaking on condition of anonymity because of their safety concerns. And after that very lengthy news broadcast, you are now up to date. Thank you so much. I think, all right, very well. Now, this story from Ethiopia, I think the peace process has made good strides, and we were happy when, the mediators were able to break this stalemate that was there, the talks. And I think the last time we were talking about this, the spokesperson of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, had said, they have no intention of taking arms and starting fighting again. They respect the agreement that they made with the government, and they intend to fully cooperate and see that normalcy returns between that side of the country and the rest of Ethiopia. And so there has been some reports of aid getting to that area. We know they were locked from the rest of the country, still are, as you have heard when I was going through that story. Media access is not allowed yet, and also there are some organizations and some human rights groups that are not still allowed to access that area. So you wonder why. What is going on, and what is the government trying to hide in that region? If the ceasefire is holding, we know a lot of things happen. So, and from what the story that I'm reading to you right now, the federal forces now have full access because, the TPLF are not fighting, and other forces now, and they're said to be looting and doing other things that might not be compatible with whatever that was signed. So if peace has to be maintained, then peace has to be maintained. So as much as one side has put down their arms, I think also the federal government has a part to play and has a responsibility to ensure that the healing process is done in a way that people don't feel targeted, that really encourages everybody in Ethiopia to move forward. But when you hear stories like this, it might foment a bit of disquiet among the population. So I hope that these stories, they're not widespread in that region. And I don't know what Eritrea is still doing in Ethiopia. I don't know what Eritrean forces are still doing. And I don't know what kind of, the last time we were having this conversation, I said, among other issues, when we were looking at the mediation process and perhaps some of the factors that had made it not be successful until what we saw happen last month. And even as the AU-led mediation process tried to look at the factors and what is happening there in Ethiopia, they cannot close their eyes to the fact that Eritrea was fully involved from credible sources in this war, internal conflict in Ethiopia. And so Eritrea must be held accountable and let Ethiopia deal with its own internal issues, Ethiopians, they need to reconcile with themselves. They need to reconcile, and they need to be left alone to do things and to make sure that they're able to now own this process and see how they can come together as a people. Because I've said here before, TPLF and these are the disgruntled groups, they're not fighting to have their own country, to secede. They perhaps felt that this new government, led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, had let them out. And, TPLF had been in power for 27 years. But that does not give them a right to participate in a conflict in the manner in which they did, okay? Because both sides were wrong. TPLF looked like it was, it was actually daring the federal government. And you can't dare a government. When the government feels threatened, it will do whatever it needs to do, which was also wrong from the federal government. So both sides, really, on this case, were on wrong. So Ethiopians must be left to themselves to deal with their own issues. And whichever help they need, like they've been having from the mediation team, that is well and good. But Eritrea must be held accountable. Eritrea cannot be left to just go like that. Isaias Afwerki must be answerable to some of these things that happened during this conflict, and perhaps he should explain why he found it necessary to get Eritrea into that internal conflict there in Ethiopia. And we know the other factors also that were at play and still are, as far as this conflict is concerned. We cannot forget the issue of the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam that some countries have not been supportive of. So there has been perhaps some thoughts that some of these countries could have been supporting, one side of this conflict. We don't know that for sure, but there are other factors that contributed to fueling this war. But Eritrea must be held accountable, and what they are still doing in Ethiopia, they are still in that part of Ethiopia, and they're part of the forces that are looting. They're part of the forces that are holding some people in Tigray in detention. This has to stop. If a ceasefire was signed and the country is working towards a path of stability so that it can go back to normalcy, then we can't be hearing reports of things like this happening. If they signed it, then they must mean it. And Ethiopian forces and all the stakeholders, perhaps the TPLF and other stakeholders involved, they must respect, whatever it is that they signed. And these abuses, human rights abuses that are still ongoing there, however small or however spread out they are, this must stop so that, these people can get back to their lives. These people can get back to their lives. Now, this case that has been filed by a group from Nigeria, a social economic rights and accountability project, that's what they call themselves, and 16 other Nigerians, and they've filed a suit at the ECOWAS Court of Justice against the current President Muhammadu Buhari. Good luck with that. I don't know how far this will go. I don't know how far, because it was discovered recently that, there have been some 58 illicit oil pipelines from the main oil pipeline, and this has been used to plunder the country's oil revenue. So what this group is seeking to do, they filed this case. So this person, Eric Doe, he filed on behalf of himself and his community, which is the Goi community in Gokana, in the local government area of Rivers State, and on behalf of the Goi community. Now, they're saying that Buhari's regime failed to uphold its failed and is still failing, because he's still the president until next year when they go to the elections. So Buhari failed, or has failed, to uphold the international legal obligation to ensure that the country's oil wealth is used solely for the benefit of Nigerians, and the wealth does not end up in private pockets. Okay, so they argue that the illegal pipelines have been operated for many years without notice, implying a flagrant violation of international human rights obligations to ensure the proper, effective, and efficient management of the country's wealth and natural resources. So they went to the court in ECOWAS for some relief, and they're saying the people who are coming from this area that the oil is present, the Niger Delta area. We know there are a couple of scandals and human rights abuses and so many stories that have come from this area, this oil-rich area, Niger Delta. So what they're saying is the people around the Niger Delta, they are entitled to the internationally recognized human right to an adequate standard of living. Because this, what they're saying, because this oil comes from the Niger Delta, therefore, the people around this region must therefore have a good living, like maybe those who live in Qatar, I don't know. But because this oil comes from there, so they're entitled to have a better life than what they have, because the life is, I mean, the oil is from that region, but it goes ahead to benefit people who are not even from that region. So the argument is people around this area should have an internationally recognized human right to an adequate standard of living, and not the kind of poverty and low standard of living that they're currently experiencing, the majority, because this oil is coming from there, and so they should live like people who have oil in their land, you know, the Qataris, the Saudis, such people. So they're saying people from the Niger Delta, they're entitled to that kind of living because the oil is coming from there. Like I said, good luck with that. I don't know how far this this case will go, but I'll be placing my eyes there, the ECOWAS Court of Justice in Abuja, to see how this suit will proceed. And speaking of which, those the dramas that usually surround elections in Nigeria, I think, have started, and much of it has to do with the banning of electoral materials, electoral offices, and things like that. I remember even last time in 2019, I think, in 2019, yes, February, when they were having the elections, and there were a lot of things that marred the elections in 2019. And we saw offices of the Independent National Electoral Commissions being banned. We saw electoral materials being banned. There's something about elections in Nigeria and the burning down and blazing down of these election-related materials in offices that it's really alarming. And the last elections, they happened even towards just a couple of days towards the election that, you know, made the elections to be postponed, and I think with 2 weeks, you know, because of such cases. So they've started again, and this time they targeted the arsonist, or these unknown people. They targeted, you know, a place in Ebonyi State. That is where they targeted, and about 340 ballot boxes were raised, and 130 voting cubicles, 14 electric power generators, water storage, and everything, because the country is preparing for an election. And I was just going through one of the leading newspapers there, just perusing through the stories, and I saw the Inspector General of Police saying, you know, more arms are being sent to police and to security officials across the country, because in readiness of the elections. You wonder, when you're doing elections, do you require more arms? What do you need? But with the state of Nigerian security, I guess you require more arms, you know. I can understand the presence of security officers, but more arms, but I guess that is what they shall be doing. So more arms, I think, will be taken there, and we'll see how that will work out. So I'll not look at the Democratic Republic of Congo story, because that is what we shall be looking at the top of the hour. There was an attempted coup in Sao Tome and Principe on Thursday, but it was not successful. It is a country that has experienced a couple of failed coups. There was another one that happened in 2009, and a former mercenary led that, Alessio Costa. So he led a coup, and he was still in that country. So they also arrested the former outgoing National Assembly deputy leader. You know, he was also arrested, and they're continuing. All right, so Teodoro Obiang has won the 6th term. A surprise. It's not really a surprise. I think that was expected, and he won with 94.9% of the votes. Okay, and I guess he'll be serving for the next 7 years. Fine. and he is 80 years old. Okay, and his son's term as the vice president was renewed. Fine. I guess they're used to that. They're used to that. The Equatorial Guineans are used to that nonsense. And so he won. He won. And I was just watching some news from there, and you can see people in the streets. His supporters are happy. So in a country of 1.5 million people, yeah, I think Equatorial Guineans are the ones who should be going to ECOWAS to file a suit against Equatorial Guinea, against their president Obiang. They are the ones who should be living a good life because of the amount of oil that country has. They should, all of them, they're not many, they should just get representatives, people versus Obiang, and go to the ECOWAS court and file a suit there, as those people from Nigeria wants to do, because he's run down the economy of that country. And he gets a very raw deal as far as the revenue of what they get from the oil is concerned. So the people don't get to benefit. So he's won his sixth term. Of course, opposition has been oppressed in that country. Others have been, arrested. And just towards the elections period, they even they closed the country's borders, neighboring Gabon and Cameroon and other things. And others were arrested. The government said there was a conspiracy to commit attacks in the capital Malabo, so they were arrested, and others were. So anyway, so that's it. Let's just move on from that madness from Equatorial Guinea, but President Obiang. And I wonder, because from the last time I was looking at this story, from the reports that we had, about 400,000 people were registered as voters. How long does it take to count the votes? And according to the Electoral Commission there, about 93% of those turned to vote, which I think is just something there. All right? And then the president got 6% of those votes. And yeah. So how long does it take to count close to 400,000 votes? Because they voted 2 weeks ago, they're still counting. How long? Maybe the Electoral Commission does not have a good manpower, but they've just announced him now. He was just declared a winner on Saturday, and I guess he'll start again his new term there. And yeah, the issue of Malawi's Vice President Saulos Chilima, he was charged with corruption, and he is the first vice president who has been charged in this position in Malawi. And he was arrested on allegations that he accepted money in exchange for awarding government contracts. The country's anti-corruption agency says he is accused of receiving $280,000 from a British businessman and other items. A statement says Dr. Chilima pleaded not guilty to the corruption charges in court on Friday. He had already been stripped of his powers in June, and he was first accused by the Anti-Corruption Bureau. So it's very interesting times there in Malawi. I don't know if this is political witch hunt or, President Chakwera just means business, and he's just committed in fighting corruption as he had promised, during that time. So that is also a story I shall be following. Because of the interest of time, I see Wanda Wesonga has joined, but I only have 2 minutes before I'm done. So Wanda, maybe you just say good morning. All right. Okay. So we'll just, I'll just end the show, and then we will come back with the other show on top of the hour. Please don't go too far. This has been Good Morning Africa. My name is Miriam Ogutu. I'll see you in a short bit. Bye-bye.